Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our monthly Transit Choices meeting. We have two very interesting and relevant presentations for you this morning. So it is my pleasure to introduce our first guest speaker, Tabia Gamble. Tabia is with MDOT MTA. She is a project manager. Her presentation is going to focus on the Raised Transit Priority Project. Welcome, Tabia.
Thank you, Robin, and the entire coalition for having me this morning. As Robin mentioned, I am a project manager at MDOT MTA, and I am overseeing the Raised Transit Priority Project. So this project is a transit improvement project along the CityLink blue and the CityLink orange line. So I'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. So this is a coordinated effort between MDOT MTA and BCDOT, so Baltimore City Department of Transportation, as a joint effort. And really a successful project, though, would not be successful without the intentional and active participation of other members like the Community Advisory Panel. So that is made up of community associations, advocacy groups, and other key stakeholders. Our interagency committee, which are state and local workers and the different transit agencies, the different organizations throughout both the county and the city, and then elected officials, and kind of really the public as well. So that's transit riders, pedestrian and bicyclists that use this corridor, the schools that are along this corridor, and the people that live along this corridor. So before I really get into the RAISE project, I know there are a lot of different efforts that are happening in this kind of what we call the East-West corridor. And so I just kind of want to talk about those, and then we'll go further into the RAISE project. So along this East-West corridor, we have efforts that are happening both in the short term, which is the 1 to 2 year, and then in the medium term, which is this RAISE project, that's that 3 to 5 year term, and then in the long term, that 5 to 10 years. And MTA is committed to providing the best possible service to all of our riders, right? So, and that's in several different ways. So in the short term, we regularly evaluate our route alignments, our schedules, and our bus stop locations, and that'll continue over the next 1 to 2 years. And as we find adjustments that need to be made, we continue to make those and what we call our service changes. So our major service change happens in the fall, and smaller service changes happen in the spring and the winter. Again, this RAISE project really sits right in the middle. So taking term over that 3 to 5 year, and those are going to be, again, the transit improvements that you'll see along the CityLink blue and the CityLink orange lines. And then thinking larger as a bigger, more substantive project is the RTP project. So that's kind of our long-term project that we've already begun. They have 2 different corridors that they're looking at for the RTP project, and additional corridors will be studied over the next few years. And that is looking at more major changes to this East-West corridor and other corridors throughout the region. And then kind of talking about this RAISE grant. So this project is a grant award from FTA. And so if you're interested in finding out more about the grant, if you want to kind of read our project narrative, the benefit cost analysis, or find out who some of the supporters were that wrote us letters, you can go to our project website, which is raisebaltimore.com, where we have all of that information linked. And again, I'm sure that many of you may have heard or have already seen a presentation on what this corridor is, but I would just like to orient you all to kind of where this corridor is, where it's starting, where it's ending, and kind of where we're looking at transit improvements. So as you can see here, this project is starting on the western terminus at CMS on the CityLink blue line. It'll run across the CityLink blue line through Baltimore City, and it'll end on the end of the orange line at Foxbridge. So when I start to talk about improvements, this is the corridor that we're really talking about. And this corridor is really important, right? This corridor has been targeted for investment over the last decade. There have been several different projects and other efforts that have already been made, and efforts that are currently being made even before this project will begin, right? So improvements to this corridor, being that it's 2 of our highest ridership routes in the city, it'll really improve the lives of transit riders that are trying to access jobs, recreational activities, and different schools along the corridor. So along this corridor, you'll see there are several carless households, there are several minority households, and other transit-dependent riders. And so improvements to this will improve their lives as well. And when thinking about what we wanted the project objectives of this to be, again, it's not something that's going to happen in 1 to 2 years, but it's also not an effort that's going to take 7 to 10 years. And so what our objectives were with this project are really to improve transit reliability, accessibility, and comfort, to attract those new riders that may not be riding transit right now, but would think about it if there was some potential improvements to the service, connecting to some of the emerging developments that are happening throughout the region, and improving the safety and the accessibility of our service. Creating kind of safe cycling connections. A part of this is going to be some bicycle infrastructure. Again, this corridor is seeing a lot of investment right now, and so making sure that we're connecting transit to any of the revitalization efforts that are happening throughout the city and along this corridor. And then, as always with all of our projects, making sure that we're aligning with the overall sustainability program and goals of MDOT MTA and of MDOT overall. So I know that we're very short on time, so I'm not going to take too long on this, but I would like, if folks would like to participate in the chat, you guys can add kind of your thoughts of what transportation improvements you think needs to be made in this RAISE project corridor. So we do have some of our project team that is on the line, and they will be recording because one of the aspects of this project is we really want to get feedback. And so any opportunity we have to get feedback or hear from the public, hear from advocacy groups, we want to do so. So if you guys could just take a moment to write in the chat kind of what improvements do you think need to be seen in this corridor as we begin, the early stages of this project. And like I said, I'm not going to stay on this slide for too long, but continue to add your thoughts to the chat. And so I'm going to talk about, and so as you guys are putting kind of your thoughts of what you think is needed, I'm going to kind of dig into some of the different project elements that we have thought about and discussed as a part of this project. So here, as you can see, where these locations are not set in stone. We're still in the early planning phases, and we're trying to hear from folks of where they think things should go and how they think it should look. But our general elements of the project are going to be hub improvements, dedicated bus lanes, transit signal priority that's going to work in conjunction with the dedicated bus lanes, pedestrian and bicyclist infrastructure improvements, some safety improvements along the corridor, and then a lot of bus stop enhancements. So shelters, lighting, things like that. And then in addition to kind of those major components, there will be some other complementary investments, such as electric vehicle charging stations along the corridor as well. So getting into the dedicated bus lanes, I'm sure many of you guys know what dedicated bus lanes are. It's a priority lane for the buses over vehicular traffic. And really the importance of this is, as you'll see throughout the city, we have a lot of other dedicated bus lanes that are there, but it's similar to, a bicycle lane that if it's not coordinated throughout the city, it's not very useful. And so a part of creating a reliable transit system overall is kind of connecting all of these efforts. So as many of you know, there are new dedicated bus lanes along North Avenue, and there's already some in downtown. There's some on Pratt Street, on Lombard Street. And we have several projects right now that are going to be putting additional dedicated bus lanes, both as pilots and as permanent projects throughout the city. And so the major part of this is really trying to create a network of dedicated bus lanes to enhance the bus reliability and bus speeds. And then similar to the dedicated bus lanes, transit signal priority really just works with those dedicated bus lanes to make sure that we're giving transit the priority in our transportation network, both in the city and in the region. And so putting these transit signal priorities at the different intersections where you're going to see the dedicated bus lanes is just another way to kind of enhance the faster travel speeds and improve reliability for transit riders. Then we're going to be looking at several kind of bus stop enhancements, right? So ADA compliance, bus shelters, pedestrian lighting. And again, this matters because our riders' comfort matters. If you're waiting for a bus, you want to be comfortable, and we want our transit riders to be comfortable. And this is a really big part of kind of bringing in new transit riders. For someone that may not be riding transit, a comfortable bus stop may make the difference for them. And so making sure that those aspects are improved throughout this project. We're looking at over 100 bus stops right now. And so that's a major part of this project, along with the wayfinding and the real-time signage, making sure that transit riders can have an idea of when is the next bus coming. If the bus may be delayed for a reason, being able to see the real-time signage of, okay, the bus is going to be here in 2 minutes is really important. So those are other improvements that we're looking to make with this project. And then again, ensuring that we have a coordinated effort, right? So the pedestrian and the bicycle safety, it all works with the transit, creating things like curb extensions, which are going to reduce the crossing distance for pedestrians for them to get to a bus stop, or when they're alighting the bus for them to be able to get to their destination. Stuff like streetscape improvements, right? So around new development, we talked about that revitalization efforts. So making sure that the streetscape is also inviting and welcoming, and again, comfortable for our transit riders. The ADA improvements, ensuring that persons with disabilities are able to get onto the sidewalk and get to the bus stop that they need, or get off of the bus stop, is really important. And then looking at some bicycle infrastructure from the downtown area to the West Baltimore MARC station, again, to just improve the bicycle safety for our bicycle riders. And thinking of a multimodal system, we are not the only vehicles, though transit is great and it's amazing, it's not the only vehicle that's on the road. And so we have a partnership with BGE to install 25 electrical vehicle charging stations throughout this kind of corridor. And this is part of the sustainability goals that MDOT is working towards. So ensuring that we're putting these throughout the system and really focusing on those equity zones. So historically, sometimes these are placed in different parts of the city, but making sure that they're really focused on those equity zones that Baltimore City has outlined is important to us to help to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. Now, what you're seeing here is it's not anything that's final. It is an early stage rendering just to get folks thinking about what the possibilities are when we're talking about this project, right? So you'll see pedestrian crosswalks, and you see the red paint for the dedicated bus lanes. And this is, again, not final, but just to get our thoughts of what is there, what's missing, right? When you look at this rendering, to you all, what's missing? What should be there? You'll see the bus shelters, you see the real-time signage, but what else have we missed? Or what are we not highlighting? What are we not seeing? And so this is really just to get you all and the public thinking of what are the possibilities. And this is another example of another rendering on another part of the corridor. So this is at Fayette Street, east of Front Street. And again, just to help us kind of visualize what could actually be there. What could this look like when we start to talk about this project and the enhancements that come along with it. So now that I've kind of gone through the elements that we're thinking about in this project, that's the dedicated bus lanes, the transit signal priority, the bus stop improvements, the bike and pedestrian improvements, what elements are missing? Have we missed anything? Are there elements that we should be focusing more on? Are there particular aspects of the corridor that may need more bus stop improvements rather than other pieces? So similar to kind of the first question that I asked, I'll just ask that you guys use the chat function to let us know your thoughts as we continue along. Then kind of going through some of the other logistical pieces of the project. This is a federally funded project, and so we do have to comply with the NEPA. We have already begun our NEPA, so we're looking at our bus stops currently to see which ones will definitely need improvements, whether that be ADA and ensuring that we are not going to be impacting any cultural resources, natural resources, or environmental justice populations. And with this project and the improvements that we expect, we do not anticipate any major impact to any of these kind of resource groups. But it is something that we do have to comply with. And then the public outreach is something that we're really, really excited about with this project. It's a really big piece of this project for us. And so we've already kind of begun a lot of this. So we have started our street teams. And so we started out on our street teams about a week and a half ago. And so we've been at locations like the West Baltimore MARC station. We have been at other parts of the corridor. So the other day we were at Edmondson and West Franklin Street. And so we're doing just a set of pop-ups along the corridor to really talk to the transit riders, the people that are riding this system, that are relying on the bus. And so to get their thoughts on what kind of improvements we'd like to see. So what we've been doing at those street teams is we have our kiosk that's out, that again, just kind of brings awareness to the project, lets people know that this project is happening, it's starting, and we want to hear feedback. We are providing a fact sheet and an FAQ to the different riders. So we have kind of a gift bag for them. And then we're asking folks to take a survey. So some people have taken the survey on paper right at the bus stop, or we let them know about our website and then they're able to take the survey on our website. We've gotten really, really good feedback so far. I mean, we've gotten, we've had over 60 surveys completed and just 3 street team visits, which is really, really good. And then the other piece of our street teams is we'll be taking our interactive web map out. And so we'll actually have tablets and we'll be asking people to kind of let us know on the web map what your comments are. Maybe you're at this bus stop right now, but you typically use another one that you feel really needs improvements. We'll be able to go to that bus stop on the web map and really write in their comments. This will be especially useful for people that may not be as familiar with the interactive web map or may not be as comfortable to do so on their own. They'll still have the chance to participate in that way. Another really exciting piece of our public outreach for this project are the student outreach. So historically, MDOT MTA, we often have not reached the youth population, and a lot of them are taking our transit system. In the street teams that we've been out, we've been able to talk to a lot of students who have been on their way to school. And so a really exciting part of this is we have a student outreach specialist who is starting to kind of talk and build relationships with the schools so that we can get their feedback. Because it's an important population and we want to make sure that we're also serving them when we talk about serving all of our transit riders. And so we've been kind of developing those relationships, and we're hoping to be participating in some of the upcoming school events so that the students know about the project, their parents know about the project, and we're getting some good participation from them as well. And then of course, doing events like this, so coming to your meetings, talking to you all, we hope to continue to do this. And if folks on the line have other kind of groups that they think would be helpful to hear this presentation, please let us know. We'll have our contact information a few slides from now, but we'd love to go to your, come to your meetings and talk to you all. Then in addition to kind of our real in-person on the ground outreach, that's what our focus really is for this project. We also have, we'll have our virtual public meeting, which is going to be held on March 30th at 6 p.m. It will be held on Zoom, so there's no particular location that you have to get to. And I encourage you all to come. I have not been able to read all of the chat comments, but I see that they're coming through and I know it's great feedback. And so we'd love to hear some of that feedback as well at our public meeting. We've already held our CAP and our IAC meeting. So that's our community advisory panel and our interagency committee. So those were held in early March. And it was a presentation very similar to this. And then we also have our webpage. So on our webpage, you'll find the fact sheet, the FAQs. We have online comment forms if people want to leave us comments. You can access the interactive web map. So even if we're not interacting with you kind of along the corridor, you can go to the web map and kind of fill in your comments as need be. And then we also have our survey that you can complete online. It's through SurveyMonkey. It's very easy to complete. And then we also have our Title VI survey. So, and then in addition to kind of our webpage, we've been doing several e-blasts. I know that Robin mentioned that she'll also kind of share the information, but making sure that folks are getting the information about the project and that they know how they can kind of contact us and keep in touch with us. We'll be doing several kind of social media posts about the project. And kind of, so those are the main ways that we're trying to interact, but we're really, really focused with this project on the in-person, talking to people, feedback versus kind of just our website and hoping that people come and find us. We're really working to go and find people and get the feedback. And again, like I mentioned, we have our interactive online map. So as you can see here, I'm not going to go to it right now, but again, if folks have kind of questions, please feel free to reach out to the project team. But this is a really cool opportunity, that it's 24/7 online accessibility. So you can just go online and you can kind of go along the corridor. Again, if you have a particular bus stop that you take, or there's a particular area, you can go right there and you can kind of leave comments like, oh, I think there needs to be bus stop enhancements, or this would be a great location for dedicated bus lanes. And you can leave us those comments and we'll be able to kind of filter through and add them as we're continuing on the planning and the design of this. So it kind of it does have a legend and there are instructions as soon as you open into the map, but then you use different push pins of like which elements you would like to see or which elements are needed. And so it's a really cool feature that we're really excited to be using for this project. And before I close, just giving kind of a general project schedule. So right now we're in the spring, we're coming up on our 15% virtual public meeting. And then we'll continue into the fall with our 30% virtual public meeting. Along that entire timeline though, we will be doing kind of the street teams and looking for public outreach, hoping to attend as many kind of community meetings as possible wherever we're invited. Throughout this year. And then next year in 2023, we'll begin our preliminary engineering phase and set to go to construction, between 2024 and ending in 2027. So that is, again, it's in the 3 to 5 year for the completion of this project. And right now we're just in the early phases. And with that, I will close. Again, thank you guys for having me. And any questions that folks may have, please let us know.
Thanks very much, Tabia. And thank you, Jamie, for coordinating the screen. If we could stop the screen sharing for a moment, I'd like to see the full gallery. So we can do a couple of things. Please, if you'd like to raise your hand and ask a question for Tabia, I'm happy to acknowledge you. And then we can also, we have time, we can also look in the chat. Jimmy, did you have your hand up? Jimmy?
On mute. Yeah, what?
Did you have your hand raised? Okay, that's fine.
You hear me?
Yes.
I just want to say, I think it was a really excellent presentation. I'm excited about your all's outreach, particularly students. I was on a virtual meeting with the Fund for Educational Excellence, and several students from different high schools got up and complained how difficult it was to get to school on time using public transportation. So I think that's a really important part of your outreach. I think you're doing an excellent job. It's exciting. We want to help in any way we can. So let us know what we can do.
Thank you so much.
Klaus?
Yeah,
oh, sorry.
Oh no, I was going to say it's been really exciting to see the students kind of participation and willingness to complete the surveys at the bus stops. It's been really exciting. So we're excited to continue that.
Klaus?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. So most of the improvements in the corridor are sort of wayside improvements, and they're very welcome. On the other hand, the wayside improvements only work if the underlying real bus operation works well. And the bus link distinction between local link and CityLink really is imperceptible for the user pretty much. And the old distinction that we had when there was a quick bus was much more clear, and that quick bus 40 operated in the same corridor. And since the corridor is so long, I think a really important piece of all the corridor improvement needs to be to have something like a limited bus stop, bus operation going on. So to really benefit on quicker transportation and shorter trip times, because the whole equity equation really centers around how long it takes people to get from their home to their job destination.
And I think that's a really good point, and that kind of goes along with, what I was saying with those are the type of assessments that we try to do in our 1 to 2 years. So with our, in the short term, those are the kind of assessments that we try to make. There's no definitive decisions as of yet, but those are the type of things that they are looking to assess.
I would just add with the RAISE grant, it does only allow for like capital spending of infrastructure. But as Tabia mentioned, those service side of improvements are something, things we're thinking about at MTA and can do so with our fall annual service changes.
So we have a question in the chat from Anna, which sort of piggybacks on what Klaus was just mentioning. She asked, would it be possible to bring back the quick bus? In my experience, those were more reliable and faster than the color-coded buses.
And I think kind of to Jamie's point, as she just said, so with this grant, we have to do kind of an infrastructure improvements, but those are assessments that MTA is making to see kind of what additional options we may have to make service changes.
Yeah, and as part of our regional transit plan that we printed in 2020, introducing limited stop service, kind of similar to the quick bus we had before. That's one of our goals as the agency. I think it's just kind of when might that fit into a fall service change.
So we have a couple of questions / thoughts from Sean. Is the RAISE grant for construction or planning / design engineering? Was curious with the 3 to 5 year timeline shown earlier.
Yeah, so it's for everything. So we're starting the planning phases right now, and then we will work through design and construction. But the grant does fund the design and the construction part as well.
And what defines a hub? In addition to bus, are other investments planned at some defined hubs, like at Bayview and Mark, for example?
So in this project, we're defining the hubs just as high transfer locations. So around those locations, that's where we're really looking at kind of the additional shelters, a lot of additional lighting, where there's high transfer activity.
And from Sue, what can MTA do about shuttle buses parked in bus lanes? Baltimore Street has rest and shuttle buses parked in the bus lane Monday through Friday during PM rush hour.
One of the aspects that as an agency we're trying to work on and as part of this project is also kind of the educational piece. And so making sure that folks understand how you're supposed to be interacting with the bus lane. Some people just don't know. They're not familiar with what the dedicated bus lane is and that you shouldn't be in it. And some people they see the sign, but they just don't really understand. So part of it is that educational piece of letting drivers know what you can and can't do, because that shouldn't be happening, especially during kind of peak hour. And so making sure that folks understand how they should be interacting with these dedicated bus lanes is an important piece as well.
We do have our MTA police that enforces the lanes, but we're also tracking bills in the legislature right now, hoping to get automated enforcement to help with our bus lanes.
And the second part of her question is regarding ADA. When will buses have visual stop announcements for the deaf and hard of hearing riders?
Yeah, I know that's something our buses should be doing, but we can check back with folks in the agency and get back to you on that too.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that's important. That has come up before. I will share both with Tabia and Jamie. I will share the questions in the chat as well. And if there's anything that you can get back to us on with respect to more information, we would appreciate it, and we will share that with our participants. This is from Gail. Better connection between East and West Baltimore. Reconsider red line. Light rail is quicker and more attractive to commuters than buses. Any comments or thoughts on that?
And I think when thinking about something like the light rail, right, that's on like the long-term scale. So it just wouldn't be able to be implemented on a 3 to 5 year timeline. And so those are thinking about more projects with the RTP, which is on that 5 to 10 plus year timeline. And so it is a really good point. They're almost kind of like different projects though.
Okay.
And
Yes.
I would encourage you all, for those that missed the presentation last month, we shared more about the RTP corridor studies, the east-west and the north-south. And so you can learn more information from there as well, even seeing some of the potential, anchors or alignments.
So we have time just for one more question. And as I mentioned, I will share the chat at the completion of the meeting. This comes from Raven. Her question is a true and complete BRT line not an option? Her thought is that we're always sort of trying to incorporate bits and pieces. As a result, we get something that isn't actually any more reliable or quick. So this is regarding a true and complete BRT line. Is that an option?
I think that's something that is more part of the RTP regional transit plan project, is having a full-fledged BRT that really needs that. We wanted to have that giant investment of dedicated transit ways, larger stations, just not something that's really in the raised budget, which is what was available from USDOT, but something we're considering as part of the regional transit plan effort.
So we can follow up with the RTP in the team on that as well. Well, thank you very much for your interesting and informative presentation. We really appreciate you spending part of your morning with us, and we look forward to receiving your presentation, which we will share with the meeting participants as well as the recording. And certainly we'll make sure that everyone has your contact information for additional thoughts, questions, and feedback.
Thank you for having us, Robin.
Our pleasure. I would now like to welcome Sean Winkler, our second presenter. Sean is a director with Tai Ginsberg Associates. His presentation is going to focus on the bipartisan infrastructure package and how can Baltimore benefit. Welcome, Sean.
Hey, Robin. Thanks for having me. See if I can get this share going. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, thanks, Robin. Again, my name's Sean Winkler. I am a federal advocate for transportation in DC and a longtime Transit Choices volunteer. So it's wonderful to see many familiar faces on this call. With all the press and news going on about the infrastructure bill in Washington, money already starting to get pushed out in some various programs, I thought it might be fun to look at a couple of the programs as well as the bill for a high level to talk about, how it can impact a city and an area so much of us love on this call. So this past November was truly a historic moment for infrastructure. President Biden signed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in November, which you may also hear called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the bipartisan, you name it. It's got about 5 or 6 names at this point. For my presentation, we're going to stick with the IIJA. But anywho, a $1.2 trillion bill, and this is 4 times the size of the 2015 infrastructure bill, which is just a stunning difference, as you can see on this chart on the right. I'll get into some of these specifically a little more. But, with Amtrak Joe in the White House, rail is arguably the biggest winner in this bill. Federal Railroad Administration literally overnight is going to see a 500% increase in funding, which is just a stunning amount for a single agency. But of course, it's not the only winner in this bill. Something very unique about this bill, when you think about federal infrastructure law, It's generally an authorizing package. So that basically means Congress will say, you know, here are our policy and programmatic goals for the various surface transportation programs over the next 5 years. We think it should be funded at X. And then every year in the budgeting and appropriations process, the appropriators decide if we're going to fund it at X, are we going to fund it at Y, are we going to fund it at Z? What's really exciting about this bill is that it was both an authorization and an appropriations package as one. So they actually put forward $550 billion in advance funding right away. So as soon as, you know, President Biden signed this bill, you basically had a bill that was bigger than our last infrastructure package immediately for the agencies to start implementing. So this is just a really unique moment for infrastructure with this amount of guaranteed funding, and potentially a lot more coming down the line over the next 5 years through the appropriations process. So thinking about Baltimore a little bit, you know, I think the city is really well positioned to compete for these funds. You know, a lot of it's going to go through the traditional formulas that our friends at MTA here see, especially on the transit side for urbanized areas, as well as state of good repair. You know, right off the top, a lot of those formulas for transit are going up, you know, over 40%, which is really just a stunning amount of support for capital for the MTA on its fixed guideway systems, as well as the bus systems. But a strong feature of this bill is also going to be the competitive grant funding, which many states and agencies don't always like because it's more work and costly consultants to put together grants. But I do think it's really a unique opportunity for cities, particularly Baltimore, to put forward their kind of projects that are on top of mind. And just kind of given some of the themes of the Biden administration, you know, there's been a lot of talk about this Justice 40 initiative, which is an executive order that basically says, you know, 40% of federal investments must go or have some type of benefit to, you know, historically economic disadvantaged communities. And this infrastructure package is really, to me, going to be the test ground on what that actually looks like from an administration standpoint on, you know, how do we implement that? And that, of course, does not just mean urban areas, that of course means rural areas as well, that lack connectivity and investment. But just given Baltimore City's history and, you know, a lot of the challenges the population has, Baltimore should, you know, have a good chance for some of this funding. Another change in this bill is a new focus on city and municipal governments at the local level. Traditionally, a lot of this stuff just flowed through formula programs, but you know, many of those formulas went right to state DOTs or MPOs and kind of cut out local governments in the process. That's really changing, whether through the competitive grant programs or some of the flexibilities here, like complete streets. I'll just mention that one, for example. You know, for the street design, you know, the feds basically said you had to comply with either the state guidelines or the FHWA signing off on the state guidelines for street, road design, whatever. This bill basically says you no longer have to, kind of allowing municipal governments to get out in front on things like complete streets and still be eligible for federal funding to support those efforts. And then, as I mentioned briefly, you know, MDOT MTA, you know, right off the top here, we're going to see a 40% increase into some of their bread and butter funds, you know, through these FTA formula programs, which is really exciting.
Mhm.
So a couple direct things. It's such a large bill. I just kind of wanted to relate this to Baltimore as best as I could here with a couple fun little things. So the water taxi, pretty iconic. You know, we got the harbor, you know, so much of the community, you know, is on water. And we kind of have two systems here, right? We have, you know, this private one that is supported by Baltimore DOT. To my knowledge, it's a little tough to find information about these things. And then we also have the harbor connector, which is kind of the more kind of what you'd consider traditional public transit, where, you know, Baltimore DOT seems to provide construction support and things for the water taxi. from recent grant awards, but that's neither here nor there. Believe it or not, ferries were also a huge winner in this bill. To see a 100% programmatic increase for things like construction of terminals for new boats is really just a stunning amount of new funding for this, as well as the ability for operational support. So as we heard from MTA, MDOT just a second ago, so many of the federal programs are focused on capital, which agencies don't always love because it kind of harms their flexibilities. Though that may change, as we've seen with some of the emergency relief funds from the COVID-19 pandemic. But super exciting for ferries to kind of also potentially see this operating support, which is tougher to find in the federal programs. And as well as electrification and kind of zero emissions, a huge focus of this bill. Up to 250 million just for electric or low emission ferry vehicles and corresponding charging infrastructure. I thought ferries would just be a fun one to mention here because it's just so iconic to the city, but really a big winner in this bill. Something I want to mention, our senators here in Maryland have been pushing, Cardin and Van Hollen, is this Reconnecting Communities program that did make it into the final bill. Not at the funding levels that were initially proposed, but it is in there. And the goal of this program is to basically reconnect communities historically divided by infrastructure investments, kind of thinking about the national highway system, interstate system, even industrial areas in South Baltimore, even things like, natural infrastructure barriers, like the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland, for example. Really kind of a chance and a program to kind of look at, how, our city communities and, parts of this country have perhaps been intentionally or unintentionally divided by infrastructure. So it's $1 billion program over this 5 years, which is not a huge program, but, I think symbolically the fact that this program has been authorized to address things that could include the highway to nowhere, something like that in Baltimore City, and kind of plan that as, better connectivity, to a neighborhood. I mentioned I-83 on here, communities south of the Hanover Bridge that see a lot of industry and kind of division, by infrastructure on the rail side as well as the industrial side. There's a lot of potential in Baltimore for this program to make a difference and kind of reconnect, neighborhoods, once again. So it's not a huge program, but I think symbolically, it's something really neat for Baltimore City. I mentioned rail briefly. It is the big winner in this bill. There's just no doubt about it. Nearly a 500% increase compared to the last bill in funding. If I see a 500% increase in my 401k, I'm pretty excited. I'm sure the Federal Railroad Administration is pretty excited about this. So we have a lot of rail in Baltimore. I'll start on passenger. Maryland is really blessed to be on the Northeast Corridor. Other states around the country have to pay directly for their Amtrak services. In Baltimore, we get it for free. You pay for your ticket, but the federal government supports Amtrak on the Northeast Corridor. That's really a blessing. So a couple things, I saw the questions about ADA on the bus side. There's a lot of carve outs for ADA station upgrades in this bill, including in Amtrak's Northeast Corridor. This is a little different, but I'll mention it as well. Senator Tammy Duckworth from Illinois also got a program called the All Stations Accessibility Program that is targeted to legacy transit systems, which basically means the East Coast and Chicago, basically to upgrade commuter rail and heavy rail stations to compliance. Big issue for Senator Tammy Duckworth. Many of you may know she was injured overseas serving our country and lost her leg and is in a wheelchair today. And she was really a champion for that program. But across this bill, there is a lot of focus on ADA compliance and station improvements. So I just wanted to point that out on the Amtrak side. And there are also competitive funds in addition to kind of these funds off the top to Amtrak, that as well as Amtrak states, partners can compete for. This federal state partnership program last year had $1 billion in funding. this year it's going to see over it had 100 million in funding last year. And under the bipartisan bill, it's going to go overnight to over 7 billion, which is just an insane amount of money and increase from where some of these baseline programs were. And of course, Baltimore on the freight side, we have we're very tied into our freight rail infrastructure here with the Port of Baltimore, as well as highway grade crossings. So there's a new program with advanced funding right off the top just to, address and remove highway railway grade crossings and close them. So whether you take one railroad and put it under the other, you fly it over, you move the highway, we want to see a decrease in incidents of both pedestrians and vehicles interacting with rail tracks, because unfortunately accidents do happen. And unfortunately, there's generally a higher fatality when there is a train involved, just given the nature of physics there. So there is a big focus on that. And then I'll mention the CRISI program, Consolidated Rail Infrastructure Safety. That's a broad program, both for freights and Amtrak, to do things like safety, to do things like infrastructure. I brought up the Howard Street Tunnel here, which gotten a lot of press. So rail is really a big winner in this bill. And then I won't spend too long on this because we just heard about it. But there's also a lot of nationally competitive grant programs run by the US DOT's secretary, our friend Secretary Mayor Pete, as I call him now. So we heard a little bit about the RAISE grant. That program is actually authorized now. It was actually just the year-to-year appropriations program. It now exists forever, hopefully, and has some formalized guidelines finally, as opposed to the appropriators just making them up every year. There's also the infra program. Howard Street Tunnel won that. And there's also financing opportunities. These are all programs that they continued. And some of these financing opportunities are very cool if there is a state and local source of funding and or a possibility of revenue generation. Because things like the TIFIA program can basically give a city or state a 30-year loan before they collect interest, which is really a stunning term for some of these if you can get creative with your revenue side. And then I'll mention the mega projects. So the kind of new nationally competitive grant program they made was a RAISE grant on steroids, for lack of a better word, but it is a similar eligibility. It's a broad multimodal program, but really focused on projects of at least 100 million, with half the funding going for projects that are $500 million. So kind of a new focus on, huge infrastructure challenges across the country to hopefully address with some of these competitive grants, but they are extremely competitive and, they get a lot of national applications. So what challenges? We've talked a lot about the positives. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just, my quick thoughts on, maybe some challenges for our city and state to get some of this funding. Of course, the local and state matching fund is always an issue. The federal government always preferences programs with applicants with a strong local and state cost share. What does the gas tax holiday mean for that? Especially with talk about it being extended another 90 days. We all certainly know the state currently has a budgetary surplus, but what does that mean? How long are gas prices going to be raised, and what's the impact on our transportation programs? Just a thought. It's a lot on MDOT MTA to be the only one putting things forward for funding. We of course have Baltimore DOT as well, but at least on the transit side, they have an extremely limited portfolio. There's been a lot of talk and advocacy around what does a Baltimore Transit Regional Authority potentially look like. I think it's an idea that's interesting, if for nothing else, putting new plans and ideas forward that are perhaps independent of the politics that happen in Annapolis. There's of course national problems going on right now. We all are feeling between our supply chain, the workforce just isn't there like it used to be. And of course, inflation, we're all seeing this 7% increase in the cost of living, every quarter right now. It's a challenge. How does an agency actually keep to its budget it proposes to the federal government right now, when you can't find workers, when the cost of goods is rising, and then you can't even get the goods half the time. This is a real challenge for this bill. This is not a Baltimore problem. This is a national problem. And then what happens in Congress? So, you know, we have 550 billion right off the top. We still got another 700 billion to potentially go over the next 5 years. And that is subject to the yearly budgeting process on the Hill. So I think there's really going to be a push by the Biden administration to get as much of this money out as humanly possible, as quickly as possible. And that's just going to put a lot of pressure on the states and the locals to be ready to compete. Because politics is changing, elections don't wait for anyone, and they're coming. You know, this is just a thought I have. You know, what else besides the red line for Baltimore Transit? You know, what can we do to perhaps put forward other options to expand our current assets, whether it's the MARC, whether it's our existing subway system, whether it's the light rail system, you know, into Port Covington. You know, I feel there's so much pressure on the red line that perhaps we forget about, you know, taking a fresh look at the assets we have already and maybe putting them forward for some of this historic funding on an expansion side. And then what's going on with some of our high profile stuff around the state. You know, the feds always want to come in at the last minute to provide those construction dollars to cut the ribbons with the politicians. That's just how the federal government likes to do it. There's, of course, set-asides for planning and things like that in the various programs. But at the end of the day, politicians want to cut ribbons. That's just how it works. But there are, of course, reasons for optimism. 2022 gubernatorial elections in the state, you know, I think there's a strong chance that we're going to see an administration in Annapolis that is just across the board more pro-transit and more transportation focused, and quite frankly is more focused on Baltimore, you know, to the point of even including them on their first investment map when it comes out. And then, of course, you know, there's a lot of exciting stuff going on today in the General Assembly on both the planning side. You know, we're seeing a lot of focus on TOD, transit oriented development out of the Washington Capital Region delegation. There was a cool little press conference in Bill, you know, they've been talking about down there to kind of leverage some of the WMATA stations a bit more to be, you know, real hubs and anchors for communities. And then, of course, expansion. There's a lot of bills going on right now, you know, between expanding the MARC, you know, reviving the red line. You know, there's clearly a lot more interest in transit in the General Assembly this session than, you know, I can remember. So that is my presentation. There's a little about me. Here's my contact information. I hope that was helpful. And of course, Robin, I'm sure will be happy to share this, but thanks.
Thank you, Sean, you know, for your wonderful presentation. I mean, certainly it gives us all a lot of food for thought. You know, particularly impressed with the depth of your knowledge. I know that this is your world. But, you know, I learned so much today about, you know, sort of the infrastructure package and really how it can relate specifically to Baltimore, which is Transit Choices focus. So thank you very, very much. I'd now like to open the floor to questions. You may either raise your hand or you may communicate with us via chat. I know that there have been some comments in the chat. Let's see. So Sean, a question from Anna. She wanted to know, can the funds be used for operations as well as capital improvements?
Not really. So a lot of this is for capital. That's just how the federal government views it. But, you know, that could change. You know, in the COVID-19 pandemic, you know, the federal government more or less saved transit. You know, let's not kid ourselves. The amount of relief the systems got was really a historic moment. And that was all operating support. So, you know, this may change over time, but it still remains that the vast majority of federal support is for capital.
Klaus, do you have a question?
Well, an observation. So this excellent overview of funding opportunities shows that transit activists in this coalition or any other need to really step up and think outside the standard box. And I don't see that we are actually really doing that. Just the previous MTA presentation is a case in point where there were all these layers of timelines, and whatever big change was all 10, 15 years out. This is the time to do it. This is the time where the money is there. And this is the time where we need to put the foot in the water and make waves, and especially waves that can't be taken back. As was explained, the politics change. The next allotments could all be reduced again when we have all kinds of other expenses all of a sudden that we hadn't foreseen. So if we don't now move with certain projects, and they don't have to be necessarily the red line, they could be marked projects that are very well mapped out. There could be light rail projects as was explained, but we need to really go for those and make sure they start so that the money for capital investment is used out of that first allocation, and so that there's a force afterwards that forces the government to kind of follow suit with A, B, and C. So I think we all need to really rally around what particular projects we want to see in this particular period.
Thank you, Klaus. We have a comment and question from Jonathan. The Reconnecting Communities money is allocated for 2022 to 2026, so it's being competed for now. Do you have any sense of whether the city and state are actively working on applying for these funds for highway to nowhere planning?
I would unfortunately have to defer to the city and the state. I personally haven't seen anything, but in some of my work, on the Hill, I certainly know the program is a huge priority for the senators that created it, which are our senators. And I know they would certainly be disappointed if the state or the city did not come up with at least something to go for it.
Thank you. And Sean, I'll also be happy to share. There's some further just thoughts in the chat. So I will do that at the conclusion of this meeting. So again, thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. And as Klaus mentioned, and we agree, the time is now. We really need to be prioritizing and articulating, those projects that we need to start focusing on, right, to move that agenda forward. Jimmy, did you have any comments before I conclude the meeting? Okay. Perhaps he'll join us in a moment. Before I say goodbye for today, I wanted to share a couple of exciting things that Transit Choices has been doing and is planning to do, starting with on Wednesday evening, April 20th, from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. We are hosting, in partnership with the Central Maryland Transportation Alliance in Baltimore, a Maryland Gubernatorial Transportation Forum at the Real News Network, which is sort of near City Hall in downtown Baltimore. The key to this forum is that the focus is specific to transportation. And we ask the candidates who will be participating, and those are candidates Baker, Francho, King, and Perez. We did extend an invitation to candidate Moore. Unfortunately, he is not able to join us. But in terms of participating criteria, one of the things that these candidates had to do was to complete a transit questionnaire. We have gathered those responses. We will be publishing them in a candidate booklet, and we will be sharing them publicly. There will also be an opportunity for crowdsourcing questions. So be on the lookout from emails from Transit Choices regarding this upcoming event on April 20th. But we're very excited about this event. The last one we held was in 2018. It was very, very successful. So we want to duplicate that, this year. And Jimmy, did you want to speak about the recent roundtable discussion that we participated in?
Robin,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I got lost for a while, disconnected. But first of all, I want to thank Sean for his presentation and ask a question. How does
I'll
he
take a
see
question, Jimmy.
being effective in helping to establish the priorities for what gets funded? Robin's on several committees where we have a voice at the table with the city on winter transit and the circulator. The regional transit plan. We're on a committee with MDOT on that. But what do you see us being able to do? I'm just curious what your ideas are.
Yeah, on some of those committees, I've heard through the grapevine that the city is thinking about expanding the circulator program to new communities, south of Hanover Bridge, doing like a Cherry Hill circulator and things like that. So on the committees, I think for the most part, just put forward new ideas for new service, because this really is a historic time for service. This is it for probably my lifetime that we're going to see a bill like this. So I think anything, you guys can do on the inside with agencies and public officials to just push them to be creative and proactive. This is the opportunity, and we're not going to get it back. Unfortunately, it's an election year. So I'd have to say, I think the biggest impact right now you guys could have is on the advocacy side. Getting these bills out of Annapolis and onto the governor's desk for expansion, for new studies of systems, we need to be moving now. And then, potentially on the administration side, just doing your best to, I hate to say cozy up, but, just get to know these candidates and be ready, to hit the ground running with them and, do what you can now to coach them up on, what matters to Baltimore, what do we need to do to improve, a multimodal transit system. I think just given that it's a midterm election year, advocacy right now is just so huge.
Well, thanks. To the people on this meeting virtually, I just want to emphasize how important it is for us to be active right now. The opportunity is now. And part of what we can do is have you all participate in these presentations like you're doing today. That's really important part of getting the public voices involved in what projects get funded. And so I thank you for your participation. And we're open to your ideas about what we should be pushing for. That's what we're here for. So thanks to the presenters, thanks to Sean, and I take it back to you, Robin.
Thank you, Jimmy. I want to close with sharing that Transit Choices was exclusively invited by the Westmore campaign to participate in a roundtable discussion this past Monday evening. So there were 4 panelists, a very, very impressive and esteemed group of fellow panelists, and candidate Westmore and with his Lieutenant Governor, Aruna Miller, chaired the roundtable discussion. It was specific to transportation. It was also to talk about the Moore-Miller transportation plan, which is on their website. It's been made public. But we were very honored to be invited to that conversation. We thought it was extremely productive. It was very positive. We were each given the opportunity to talk about areas of public transit that matter to both the city and the state. We found that both candidate Moore and Ms. Miller were extremely kind of open and very candid about their vision for transportation. So it was an honor to participate. Jimmy, is there anything else you'd like to add before we say goodbye for today?
No, that's all I have.
Well, Well, thank you all. As Jimmy mentioned, we remain sincerely grateful for your ongoing interest and support of the work Transit Choice is doing. Thank you also for sharing part of your day with us, and details regarding the April Transit Choices meeting will be announced soon. And in the meantime, please continue to look for information regarding the upcoming gubernatorial candidate forum on April 20th. We are only allowed, per sort of COVID regulations, to have 100 people being able to attend this event. It will be professionally recorded and live streamed, and we will share all of that information with you. So without further ado, have a wonderful day, and thank you again.